We had no problem with the Yukon, except by now there were only two of us, myself and Charlie, because Ollie Shepherd, the beer salesman, had to drop out, threatened with divorce otherwise. The two of us, carried on. We got to the Northwest Passage above Canada. If you can picture that black line as being the Canadian cliffs, uninhabited for 3,000 miles, and up there 500 miles away is the North Pole in the middle of the sea, all these ice floes are being chucked by the current down against the cliffs, even in midsummer. So you cannot necessarily get where we wanted to go. You might think, well, in a boat, and by now we switched from rubber boats to a 16-foot fiberglass boat, you might go like that for 3,000 miles, but you'd get crushed, because this is moving at 2 miles an hour, and that one would weigh over 1 million tons. We had to wait for the wind to blow the ice north, and that would be very stormy, but we did get through 7 days of good conditions, and we arrived the other end, where the sea began to freeze. Can you see grease ice? Within 2 hours of no wind, that will be sugar porridge ice, at which point the propellers will cavitate and you won't go anywhere. You'll run out of fuel, and there's no fuel replacement for 1,000 miles. And sadly, that's what did happen. We had to abandon the boat because the sea froze everywhere for over 1,000 miles. So we had to ski over these mountains for 300 miles. They're not named, glaciers and so on. We eventually got the two of us over here. The skis broke, so we switched to snowshoes, which have got steel claws under the ball of the foot, so you don't fall over cliffs. Charlie, on the left here, Charlie Burton, who sadly died recently of a heart attack, he had in the boat been steering, and in his survival suit, waves came over him and down his suit, and he never changed for 2 months, so the sea inside his suit made his feet raw from fungus. So when he skied, the fungus fell off, leaving no skin under his feet, so his language got bad. He then developed hemorrhoids, and his language got worse. And then one day he actually fell over and cracked his head on a rock, and his eyes filled up with blood, and he started to whinge. He basically suggested that we ought to rest for a couple of days. If we, the land group, part of the 52 people who'd given up their lives really for, as it turned out, 4 years, would be let down. Charlie did keep going, physically the toughest bloke I've come across. When he arrived, he had big problems with his feet, but we had 6 months waiting in the Arctic for the dark period, which you get up there as well, before we could set out to do the difficult bit, which was to cross the Arctic Ocean via the North Pole. People nowadays go to the North Pole, get airlifted out. When we got there, if we got there, we would have another 1,500 miles of broken sea to try and cross. 1 week after we left in the dark to try and head north, Ginny and the radio base there and the abandoned huts, two of them, one of them caught fire. She tried to put it out with a fire extinguisher, did a bad job, as you can see. And the other hut, she survived. Meanwhile, 100 miles away or more in the dark, we were trying to get ourselves out onto the moving sea. Even at minus 60, 20% of the Arctic Sea is open water because of the continual breakage by current and the wind. We had to go over this stuff. Those go up to 30 foot high, so you have to drag your sledges basically over them. We reached the North Pole and became the first human beings to reach both poles. But we were 3 weeks late on the schedule, and that's quite dangerous because in the summer the ice breaks up and then you go nowhere except where the floe that you're on wants to float. Well, we managed 300 miles from the pole of the 1,500, and then we had to stop because of the danger of breakup. We found one ice floe the size of a football field, 8 foot deep on the drill, and we put the tent up there. And there we sat in our tent. We never got bored for the next 3 months floating around, generally south luckily, because Charlie had a solar panel which gave us enough power to listen to the BBC World Service on the radio for 2 minutes a day on days when there was reception. And one day, with his headsets on, Charlie said, "The United Kingdom is at war." So I said, "Who with?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't get that bit." We sat for 5 days of bad radio reception arguing who the hell it could be. I mean, obviously, we knew that Mrs. Thatcher was aggressive, but we couldn't work out who with. I mean, of course, we assumed that it was France, but we had no proof. When they said it was Argentina, we thought that was just a stupid BBC joke. There was no rationale from our point of view whatsoever. We also did not get bored because of 19 visitors. You're in your tent, you hear a slight noise outside, smell of fish and so on. Go outside, one of you with a camera, the other one with a 44 Magnum Red Hawk Ruger revolver. What happened of the 19 bears? You banged cooking pots, hoped to frighten them away. One of them was very hungry, was quite clearly going to attack. What you do when a bear charges you, which is quite fast, the best thing you can do really is to shoot it. Now, if you do that, you will be put in prison immediately by the Canadian police. But you won't, because there aren't any up there. But before you leave Canada, you read the regulations. No shooting a bear unless it starts an aggressive charge from 10 meters, by which time it's going to be too late for you. Even then, you're not allowed to shoot it unless its body language is aggressive. Now, how do you know this? Well, on page 80, it explains that their tail must be, if aggressive, at 45 degrees to the floor. But when they're charging you, you cannot see the tail, which is a problem. They also point out that only 10% eat humans, but you can't ask them which percentage they belong to. We mainly were not worried by the bears, but we began to zigzag, and our ice floe got smaller and smaller. New cracks opened up, which could be through the tent when you're sleeping. Very frightening. Huge echoes and bangs. For 8 months we were out there floating around, getting smaller and smaller. You do not want people with you who've got too much imagination. This is why it's a good idea to take ex-military people on these things. We began to get so small that I sent a signal on the radio when it worked to Southampton, where the ship with everybody was waiting, to come up 3 months earlier than they should in June, and as a result they cracked the hull and began to sink. Very cleverly they rammed an ice floe so that the hull was up in the air, and the Scottish engineers with oxyacetylene did a botch-up job. They went back to Spitsbergen for 2 months, and we were getting very panicky. By the time we reached the most dangerous ice area in the world, in Fram Strait, they managed to try again, and they got stuck only 18 miles from where we were, at which point we used these canoes come skis, which we designed 7 years before for just this occasion. We never dared get into the canoe because we were very weak by then. The ice was moving at 2 miles an hour. We were debilitated, had to get out really quickly when the ice things came together. We then hauled them to the ship and managed to get on board. If you look carefully, you might see us over here. When we arrived on the ship, human beings for the first time in history, and the last, had been around Earth on its axis.